At 16, I weighed 35 kilograms. My parents called it discipline, called it torture. My name is Elise Moreau, and this is not a story about hunger. It's about control. About how two people who gave me life decided to measure its worth in euros and hours of starvation. I grew up in a crumbling manor on the outskirts of Lyon, France. The walls were older than mercy, the air always cold, heavy with the scent of damp wood and forgotten wine. From the outside it looked like heritage, a place that carried history. Inside it was a laboratory of cruelty. Every meal, every sip of milk, every crumb of bread came with a price. My parents, Victor and Marianne Dubois, didn't hit me. They didn't need to. They invented a system far more elegant and far more devastating. One that starved both body and soul while keeping their hands clean. Sometimes I wonder what broke first, my bones or my belief that parents are supposed to protect you. It took me years to understand what they were really teaching me. Obedience, silence, gratitude twisted into guilt. I survived that house. I walked out alive. But part of me never left its shadows. Because how do you escape a prison built by your own parents, when the guards are the people who taught you what love is supposed to mean? If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I was 10 when the rules began. The manor where we lived had long lost its grandeur. Ivy strangled the windows, and the walls sighed with winter even in summer. Yet my parents, Victor and Marianne Dubois, treated it like a kingdom, and themselves as its sovereigns. In their world, love was an equation, affection measured by obedience, and mistakes paid in hunger. They called it the ledger. It was an ordinary leather-bound notebook at first, the kind my father used for vineyard records. But soon my mother began filling its pages with the details of my life. Every euro spent on me, every resource consumed. A loaf of bread, €1. A bar of soap, 3. A doctor's visit, 20. Each number was followed by the same cold notation, the hours I now owed. For every euro, an hour of fasting. At first I thought it was a joke, a strange game my parents would tire of. But on the first night when dinner was served, I learned the truth. My siblings received steaming plates of cocoa vin and warm bread. Mine was empty porcelain. Father sat at the head of the table, ledger open beside his wine glass, spectacles glinting in the dim light. "You had new shoes this morning," he said, his tone flat, almost businesslike. €30. 30 hours of fasting. Gratitude, Elise, is measured in restraint. I nodded, not understanding, my stomach twisting at the smell of food. The candles flickered, and I stared at the reflection of my own hunger in the silverware. My siblings avoided my eyes. My mother smiled faintly, as if proud of her little experiment. Over the following weeks, the ledger grew fat with numbers. Each purchase, each indulgence recorded in elegant cursive. Milk, €12. Notebook, €5. Apples, €3. By the end of the month, I had accumulated a debt of more than 50 hours. The rule was clear: until my debt was repaid, I could not eat. I learned to hide hunger behind silence. I drank water until my stomach hurt, chewed the inside of my cheek for comfort, and learned to move slowly to conserve energy. My mother praised me for my discipline. My father called me an example of self-control. But there was nothing noble in that restraint, only fear. The dinners became rituals of humiliation. Father would read aloud the week's expenses as if reciting scripture, while I sat motionless before my empty plate. "You drank milk worth €12 this month," he'd announce. "That's 12 hours without food. Be grateful we teach you responsibility." Sometimes I'd imagine smashing the ledger, tearing every page, screaming until the chandelier shattered. But I never did. I was too small, too conditioned to obedience. The sound of the pen scratching on paper haunted me more than hunger ever could, because each stroke meant another hour erased from my body. That ledger to them was love. To me it was the first prison I ever knew. By the time I turned 12, hunger was no longer an event, it was a language. I understood it the way others understood music or weather. I could feel its moods, its rhythms, its patterns as it rose and fell through my body like tides. My ribs had begun to show through my dresses, thin lines beneath the skin that my mother called signs of virtue. She said restraint was the mark of strong character. Father agreed, telling me that control was the foundation of greatness. But what they called control was really corrosion of the body, of the spirit, of the will to resist. Mother kept the ledger now in red ink. She said black was too dull, that the color of sacrifice should stand out. Each time she opened the book, my stomach clenched. I could read my fate in her handwriting. The loops of her cursive were as precise as a knife edge. Bread €1, butter 2, medicine 15. Then in crimson at the side, 18 hours fasting owed. Father turned these numbers into sermons. He read them aloud every Sunday night, a ritual as sacred as church. Elise owes 72 hours this week, he'd say, glancing at me with a detached sort of pride. She must learn proportional gratitude. The room would fall silent except for the clink of silverware. My siblings, always exempt, chewed carefully, pretending not to notice my trembling hands. At 13, I began to faint during violin lessons. My bow slipped from my fingers, my vision speckled with stars. Madame Duval, my instructor, scolded me for lack of focus. I nodded, too afraid to tell her the truth, that my last full meal had been 4 days ago. When I stumbled home, Mother was waiting with the ledger open. Violin strings, €10, she murmured. You'll fast 10 hours tonight. Maybe hunger will teach precision. I started keeping a second ledger of my own, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room. I recorded not euros but calories. Half an apple 40. A sip of milk 20. I began to trade food for time, learning to calculate survival. If I skipped dinner 3 nights, I could afford to eat a small breakfast on Sunday. If I avoided asking for notebooks or pens, I'd owe fewer hours. Every decision, every craving, became a negotiation between life and punishment. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear my stomach groan so loudly it woke me. I'd press my hands against it, whispering just a few more hours. My skin grew pale and papery, my hair thinned, and I moved like a shadow through the halls of the manor. I stopped looking in mirrors. They only reflected my parents' success. When I turned 14, I tried to fight back, not with rebellion but with pleading. One evening, after Mother had finished her glass of Bordeaux, I knelt beside her chair. Please, I said softly. I need medicine. My chest hurts when I breathe. I'm already in debt. She looked down at me with a calm, distant smile. Pain is temporary, Elise. Character is permanent. Her perfume burned in my nose as she patted my hair. You'll thank us one day. I won't, I whispered. She laughed, a sharp sound that cut the air. Then perhaps you'll learn through silence. I tried again days later, begging Father during one of his readings. He didn't shout. He only looked disappointed, like a banker betrayed by a client. You still don't understand, do you? He said. We're teaching you how to live without dependency. You should be grateful. Gratitude. That word became poison. By 15, my friends had stopped inviting me to cafes after school. I always said no, I couldn't risk the debt a croissant might bring. Soon they stopped asking altogether. They whispered that I had an eating disorder, that I was obsessed with control. None of them could imagine the ledger that ruled me. My world had shrunk to 2 dimensions, the numbers on paper and the emptiness inside me. And then came the collapse. It was spring 2015, the school festival in the village square. I'd volunteered to help decorate, desperate for a moment of normalcy. The sunlight was sharp, the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and music. I remember laughing, an unfamiliar sound, before my vision dimmed. The world tilted. When I woke, I was on the ground, surrounded by faces and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The nurse's gasp told me everything. She's skeletal, she whispered. This child needs hospitalization. Father arrived within the hour. His voice was calm, practiced. Our daughter is fine. She's delicate, that's all. They took me home that same evening. The next day, the school was told I would be homeschooled for health reasons. My violin, my books, my small escapes, all taken away. The manor became a tomb again. My room on the attic floor was bare except for a bed, a desk, and a small barred window. Meals came irregularly. The ledger still ruled, but now it was enforced through isolation. One night, while cleaning, I found a library book tucked into an old crate. Les Droits de l'enfant, The Rights of the Child. I devoured its pages by candlelight, my pulse racing. For the first time, I saw in print the words illegal detention, child neglect, psychological abuse. Each phrase felt like oxygen. I photocopied a few pages at the village library, hiding them in my coat. At dinner the next evening, I confronted them. I threw the pages onto the table, their neat lines of French law stark against the polished wood. "This," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "is illegal. You're starving me. This is abuse." For a moment, silence. Marianne's wine glass shook in her hand. Victor's jaw tensed. "You ungrateful wretch," he hissed. "You think the law protects you? This is my house. I am the law here. You can't do this to me anymore." My throat burned, my vision blurred, but I stood my ground. They had prepared for this moment. Father rose slowly, his chair scraping the floor like a verdict. "Enough," he said. "If you want to understand freedom, we'll show you its limits." They dragged me through the hallway, down a staircase I'd never noticed before, narrow, stone cold. The smell hit first. Damp earth, rust, and mold. At the bottom was an iron door. Behind it, a small room carved from the foundation itself. The cellar. Marianne's voice was almost gentle as the lock clicked behind me. "A week down here," she said, "and you'll beg for our rules." The air was thick, almost unbreathable. A single bulb buzzed overhead, casting a yellow circle on the floor. There was a mattress, stained and moldy, and a bucket in the corner. My hands trembled as I pressed them to the stone walls, cold, slick, alive with moisture. That night, as their footsteps faded above me, I realized something I'd never understood before. The hunger hadn't been the punishment. It had been the preparation. And now the real sentence had begun. The cellar was no longer part of the house. It was a wound beneath it, damp walls pressed in like lungs breathing mold. A single bulb hung from a frayed wire, flickering in a rhythm that mimicked the tremor of my heart. The floor was uneven, slick with moisture and old dust, and every sound, every drip, every scuff, felt amplified inside that stone box. I remember tracing the cracks on the wall with my fingertips, pretending they were rivers leading somewhere, anywhere but here. My mother, Marianne, called it the reflection room. My father, Victor, called it necessary. They said I needed time to think about what I'd done, accusing them, humiliating them in front of the neighbors, daring to speak of the law. But in truth, it wasn't about reflection. It was about erasure. Every morning, Marianne would descend the stairs with a bucket of water, pour it across the floor and say, "Clean it. Maybe it will wash away your lies." The cold water soaked through my clothes, and I learned to scrub with my bare hands until the skin peeled. The stench of mildew became part of my breath. Victor would come later, carrying his ledger. He'd place it on a wooden crate and open it as though beginning mass. "One apology page for each offense," he'd say. I was to write I was ungrateful. I dishonored my parents. Over and over in perfect cursive until the ink bled through the paper. If my handwriting faltered, I had to start again. The stack of pages grew beside me like a monument to obedience. But somewhere in the repetition something broke and something else began. I stopped writing to apologize. I started writing to remember. I began marking tiny symbols in the margins. Dots, lines, numbers, tracking days, tracking shifts in the light that filtered through the cracks in the ceiling. Morning light meant one pattern, evening another. Slowly I learned their rhythm. At night, when the bulb went out, I'd exercise quietly. Push-ups, squats, stretches. Anything to remind myself that my body was still mine. It was no longer currency for their control. It was the only weapon left. I whispered to myself, "Stay strong, stay alive, stay angry." Then came the calculations. I memorized their footsteps above. The way my father's gait dragged slightly on the left. How Marianne's heels clicked twice then paused before turning the lock. They always brought food for themselves at 6, argued around 7, silenced by 9. I started mapping their habits in my mind, rehearsing possibilities. During one of Victor's visits, the nib of his fountain pen snapped, scattering small metal fragments on the floor. He didn't notice. Later, when I was alone, I picked up one thin, sharp, and shining. It became my first tool. Then came a short length of wire I pried from the lamp base, and a shard of glass from an old jar I'd broken weeks earlier. Each piece I hid carefully, under loose bricks and inside the hollow leg of the crate. It wasn't much, but it meant possibility. Marianne grew careless. Perhaps she thought the cellar had already broken me. One night, she forgot to lock the upper door fully. The bolt caught but didn't settle. I tested it, it wobbled faintly. I waited. I needed the right timing, the right silence. Day 45. I knew because my marks on the wall filled exactly 9 vertical rows, 5 days each. That morning they fought. Their voices thundered through the floorboards. Money, reputation, police. Then silence. Then the sound of a door slamming shut upstairs. I crept toward the stairs. My hands trembled as I twisted the wire into a hook. I had rehearsed it 100 times in my head, yet my heart raced so violently I thought it would betray me. The first try failed. The second caught. On the third I heard it, the click. The lock gave way. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of stale warmth. I climbed out slowly, every step a prayer. When I reached the main hall, the brightness from a nearby lamp stabbed my eyes. The air smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke, domestic, ordinary, cruelly normal. In the kitchen I saw remnants of their dinner. Plates half full, wine glasses stained red. The contrast hit me so hard I nearly fell. I steadied myself against the counter, breathing, feeling the texture of the marble. Smooth, cold, free. Then survival instincts took over. I moved quickly, searching drawers and shelves. In Father's office, I found an envelope with €200 and a USB drive. I didn't know what was on it, but it felt important, something they'd care about losing. I took it. Outside, the garden was silver under moonlight. The vines stretched endlessly toward the horizon, my family's vineyard, the same land that had fed their pride and my hunger. Near the garage, the old Citroën stood waiting, keys still dangling in the ignition. It was as if fate had decided to look away for once. I climbed in, turned the key, and felt the engine cough to life. My hand shook so violently I had to grip the wheel with both fists. I drove through the vineyard path, gravel scattering under the tires, the headlights cutting through fog. Every turn felt like a heartbeat, every shadow like a ghost reaching back. When the road widened, I took out the small phone I'd stolen months before, hidden in a book's spine, and dialed the only number I remembered by heart. Claire. My voice cracked. It's Elise. I need help. There was a pause. Then a breath. Mon Dieu, Elise, where are you? I looked in the rearview mirror, the manor shrinking into darkness behind me. For the first time I didn't feel small. I didn't feel owned. I don't know, I said. But I'm not there anymore. The wind rushed through the half-open window, carrying the scent of night, of wet earth and distance. I pressed harder on the gas, not caring where the road led. For the first time in years, I felt something that almost resembled life. Not peace, not yet, but the wild, trembling pulse of a girl who had refused to die in her parents' house. When I woke up, I was surrounded by white. White walls, white sheets, white light that burned my eyes after so many weeks in darkness. The smell of antiseptic replaced the mold of the cellar. My body felt alien, too light, too fragile, as if it belonged to someone else. For a moment I thought I'd died. Then I heard her voice. Elise, my Aunt Claire whispered, holding my hand. You're safe now. Her words trembled between us. I hadn't heard the word safe in years. She told me later how she'd driven through the night from Marseille after my call, following my stammered directions until she saw the headlights of the Citroën abandoned near the highway. I had collapsed by the roadside, barely conscious, clutching a USB drive and a torn page from the ledger. She found me there barefoot, shaking but alive. At the hospital in Marseille, the doctors hovered like ghosts of science and mercy. They spoke in low tones about refeeding syndrome, about how a starved body can die from nourishment if fed too quickly. They weighed me, 35 kilograms at 16 years old. My heart rhythm was irregular. My blood pressure dangerously low. My hair came out in clumps when the nurse brushed it. For days I floated between waking and dreaming, my body relearning what kindness felt like. They fed me spoon by spoon broth, then soft bread, then fruit. Each taste felt like both heaven and guilt. I cried the first time they let me eat without counting, without fear of debt. The nurse smiled gently and said, "You don't owe anyone anything anymore." But I did owe something, to the truth. When the police came, I told them everything. Claire stood beside me as I placed the evidence on the table. The ledger, with every transaction and punishment meticulously recorded by Victor and Marianne. The USB, which contained scanned copies of those same pages, plus photos my father had taken of my progress. He had documented my shrinking body like a science experiment. The officers didn't speak for a long time. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, finally said, "We'll take it from here, Mademoiselle Moreau." The investigation took months. My parents denied everything, of course. They claimed it was a misunderstood parenting method, voluntary fasting, religious discipline. But the evidence spoke louder than their composure ever could. My teachers testified about my fainting spells. Neighbors recalled screams. Medical reports confirmed prolonged starvation and trauma. When the trial began in Lyon, the courtroom was overflowing. Journalists, psychologists, parents, and survivors who had read about the case and wanted to witness justice. I sat in the front row, my aunt's hand steady on my shoulder. My parents entered escorted by guards, their elegance stripped away. Marianne still tried to meet my eyes, as if her gaze could summon the obedient child she once owned. I looked straight through her. The prosecutor presented the ledger first. Each page, each red ink annotation was projected on a screen. Fasting debt, 10 hours. Unauthorized food. Punishment doubled. The room went silent except for the sound of the clerk turning pages. Then came the photos. I could barely look. My own image, skeletal, eyes sunken, a ghost wearing my skin. My father had labeled them week 12, week 20. Progress satisfactory. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I rose slowly. My legs still trembled from weakness, but my voice didn't. "I was taught that love must be earned," I said. "That food was a privilege, not a right. They turned my body into currency, and I paid with my life. I don't want revenge. I want the truth to exist somewhere other than inside my nightmares." Victor lowered his head for the first time. Marianne began to cry, small, controlled tears, the kind that seek forgiveness without responsibility. I felt nothing. After 3 days of testimony, the verdict came. Victor Dubois, 12 years in prison. Marianne Dubois, 8 years. The sentence was read in a calm voice, but inside me something cracked open. A flood, not of joy but of release. For 16 years, every meal had been a negotiation. That night at the hospital canteen, they brought me a tray of simple food. Soup, bread, a small piece of chocolate. I stared at it for a long time before taking the first bite. No ledger. No red ink. No debt. For the first time in my life, I ate and it didn't cost me anything. Years passed. Now at 30, I live in Barcelona under my new name, Elise Laurent. The name Moreau carries too many ghosts. My apartment overlooks the sea, and in the mornings, I open the windows wide to let the salt wind in. The smell of freedom, I've learned, is not silence. It's air moving without permission. I work as a nutrition specialist, helping children recovering from eating disorders. I watch them sit across from me. Small shoulders, eyes that flinch when the word food is mentioned, and I recognize the weight they carry. The ledger lives in their minds too, written by parents, teachers, sometimes by themselves. I help them unlearn it. Every session I tell a version of my story. Not all of it, just enough to make them understand that the body is not the enemy. You are not an expense, I tell them. You are not something to be earned. In my office drawer I still keep the USB. I never opened its contents beyond what was needed for the trial. It remains as it is, a relic, a symbol. Sometimes I take it out, hold it between my fingers, and remember that even the smallest object can carry freedom if it once carried truth. Last year, I received a letter from the correctional facility. My parents were eligible for parole. The letter asked if I wished to attend the hearing. For a long time I stared at it, the paper crisp, official, smelling faintly of bureaucracy and old grief. I could have gone. I could have watched them plead, could have said words of forgiveness that would have made others applaud my healing. But I didn't. Instead, I made myself dinner, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a glass of white wine. I sat by the window, the city lights spilling across the table, and ate slowly, deliberately, tasting every bite. I whispered to myself, my life, my choices, my meals are mine. That was my closure. Sometimes people ask if I ever think about them. I do, but not with hatred. They were architects of a cage, yes, but I was the one who built the door. Pain became purpose. Hunger became empathy. The world they tried to shrink me from has only grown wider. When I look at my reflection now, I see color in my cheeks, strength in my arms, and peace in my gaze. My scars have softened. My body, once a battlefield, is now home. On Sundays, I visit a small community center near the sea where I teach a class for teenagers recovering from food anxiety. We call it the Wednesday table, the day I escaped. We cook together, laugh too loudly, and eat without counting. The first rule of the class is written on a chalkboard at the door. No ledgers. No debts. Only life. Sometimes after class I walk to the shoreline. The tide washes over my feet, cold and steady, and I think of that night in the vineyard, how the darkness once felt endless. Now the horizon feels endless instead. Freedom, I've learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in breaths, in bites, in choosing to stay alive every single day. And though my story began with hunger, it ends with nourishment, not just of the body but of the soul. Because the truth is, survival is not the opposite of suffering. It is the transformation of it. And as long as I live, I'll keep turning my pain into purpose. One meal, one story, one child at a time. Looking back, I've come to understand that survival is more than just escaping the place that tried to destroy you. It's about rewriting the meanings of love, control, and worth. Words my parents twisted until I almost forgot what they truly meant. Control is not love. For years, I mistook obedience for affection. Every time I starved, I told myself I was being good. That my hunger proved I deserved their approval. But love is not a leash disguised as care. Love doesn't calculate, doesn't demand receipts or sacrifices. Real love feeds. It nourishes your body and your sense of self. If someone calls it love but it leaves you smaller, weaker, afraid, it's not love. It's domination wrapped in tenderness. Debt should never be written on a child's body. No one should grow up believing they must earn the right to exist. Yet I did, every euro, every calorie, every breath measured as a transaction. My body became a living balance sheet of guilt and survival. It took years to erase those invisible numbers, to stop thinking I owed anyone the space I took up in this world. Children don't owe their parents perfection. They owe them only the chance to become themselves. Sometimes the cellar becomes the classroom of strength. When you've been stripped of everything, food, light, freedom, you start to realize what can't be taken. In that cold cellar, I found a truth my parents never intended to teach me. Resilience. The human spirit, when cornered, learns to expand in silence. I learned to count days, to use scraps as tools, to turn endurance into defiance. Pain became my first teacher, survival my graduation. Breaking free isn't rebellion. It's survival. I used to believe that leaving them made me cruel, that defying my parents was betrayal. But I understand now that freedom is not defiance. It's necessity. Sometimes the only way to honor life is to walk away from the people who gave it to you. Escaping wasn't rebellion. It was breathing again after years of suffocation. Healing means eating without guilt, living without permission. For a long time, even safety felt like theft. I'd hesitate before every meal, waiting for the old fear to surface, that someone would take it away, demand a price. But healing, I've learned, begins the moment you stop apologizing for being alive. It's choosing to eat because your body deserves to be fed, to rest because you've carried too much, to smile because the world no longer owns your pain. When I sit with the children I help now, I see pieces of my younger self in their eyes, the same confusion, the same desperate need to be good enough. And I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You are not a debt. You are not a ledger. You are a life. If my story teaches anything, it's that even in the deepest cellar, there's a door. It may take time, strength, and pain to find it, but it's there waiting for the moment you decide you are worth saving. And once you walk through it, you'll never owe anyone your hunger again. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every survivor still trapped in silence, still trying to find the courage to speak. Somewhere out there, a child is counting the hours of their own hunger, believing it's love. Somewhere, a voice is being crushed by fear and control. But stories, when shared, become light. And light finds the cracks, even in the darkest cellars. When you share this story, you don't just spread words, you spread awareness. You tell the world that abuse doesn't always leave bruises, that sometimes it hides behind kindness, behind rules, behind discipline. You remind others that healing is possible, that freedom is not rebellion, and that no one should ever have to pay to be loved. So if this story moves something inside you, let it move you to action. Speak up, reach out, listen, and most of all, never let silence win. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for believing that even the smallest voice can echo far enough to save someone else.